Hi there, everybody. This is Stephanie Haney. Welcome back to a special edition of 3 News Now. Today is Tuesday, September 14th. You're hearing me instead of seeing me because we had a bit of an audio issue at the start of this special edition of 3 News Now today, but this is important information for you to have, so we're doing it this way. And in a moment, you'll see me joined by our investigator, Mark Naymik, and we are talking about the 7 candidates who are in the running to be the next mayor of Cleveland. After today, that will be down to 2. And now, here we are. I'm Stephanie Haney, joined by Mark Naymik.
Here we have, 7 candidates, 6 have a real shot.
Okay, I want to talk about those candidates, this crowded race. Not as crowded as that race 20 years ago, but still pretty crowded. So we've got 7 candidates total. How many of them do you think have a real chance at maybe being our next mayor?
There has been a cluster in many of the polls and in what we're just seeing in the strength of the campaigns, really with 4 candidates in their campaigns. That would be former Mayor Dennis Kucinich, Council President Kevin Kelly, Councilman Bashir Jones. This isn't in a particular order. I'll go through that in a moment. And, of course, this newcomer, a nonprofit, we say executive for shorthand. We're not 100% sure all what he did there, but he does carry the title. Justin Bibb. He is really seen as the youngest and the one that's really preaching a new vision in an outsider role, has the infrastructure. So those 4 have been really competing. And when you can judge it on several levels, just who's attacking whom, it's those 4 in the mix.
Let's talk about the other ones, just so we make sure we name the other ones that are not in those top 4. What about the other 3 contenders?
Well, Zach Reed, who was a former councilman, finished, lost to Mayor Jackson 4 years ago, but did advance through that primary. He has great name recognition, has done a great job of really sticking on a simple message of safety, safety, safety. Has some support in the neighborhoods on the east side. He could be the one that places 3rd. I mean, it's that close that everybody's within striking distance. And then the only woman in the race, Sandra Williams, she's a state senator, has a great resume, both inside and outside of government. And she has, had some moments in a second debate that was on public television. She really seemed to stand out. Her campaign's been a little bit quiet. We don't always see everything they're doing, but she's worked the west and east side. Conceivably, she's there, but she just hasn't been showing up in the polls or really having that ground game that we're seeing with Bibb, who is generating, the progressive younger vote. Bashir Jones also doing that, and Kevin Kelly, which has the Democratic Party institution, a lot of unions, and then Dennis, who has, of course, people that were voted for him 40 years ago that are still around. They've always enjoyed his populist message. He still portrays himself as someone fighting for Clevelanders.
And what about the 7th contender, Debello?
Yeah, Ross Debello is a attorney from Cleveland's far west side. That's West Park. He's out on the campaign trail. He chose earlier this year not to participate in a series of interviews with Sarah Schuckman and me on the race, but he's out there. He's been in some of the forums and debates. He's really just trying to carry a message that he's completely unencumbered, has no connections, he can't be bought off. He's a reformer, but there's not a lot there. I can just tell you in campaign structure and in the polls, it's very, very unlikely he will move out of this primary, but could get some what I usually call the protest vote. People that don't like all the other regular ones, some will choose the guy they know least about.
And by the way, if you're looking for more information on the candidates right now, if you've not yet headed out to the polls, they are open until 7:30 tonight. That series with Mark and Sarah Schuckman, Leading the Land, incredible. You can find that at WKYC.com and on our WKYC app. So if you're looking for that last minute information, that's one place for you to check that out. Now, Mark, we're going to have the real results in about 4.5 hours of this, or the real projected results, because they're not final until all the provisional votes are counted and all of that stuff. The democratic process has to play out, okay, so we have to be patient. But what have the polls been showing so far today?
We are seeing very moderate turnout. The elections officials predicted, Stephanie, about 20% turnout, which would be slightly ahead of the 13%, which is abysmal, by the way, from the 2017 primary. Right before we sat down, I checked the Board of Elections, which provides voter turnout in real time. That's the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections. It showed 11% on the city's west side or east side and 10% on the west side, or one or the other. So basically about 10%. Now, we get a big push of voters coming towards the end of the day after work. Those vote totals do include those that have already returned absentee ballots. So I think the elections officials are generally pretty accurate, and it's going to come in around, I'd say, under 20%. There are a couple of pockets, some wards that are up there in that mid double-digit figures right now, so they're doing well, and that's a reflection of the candidates campaigning hard in those areas.
Now, do we have any information on how the candidates are stacking up so far as we get these results sort of trickling in?
Yeah, and look, it's early, but we and the campaigns are trying to read this crystal ball of early voting. There is a spike of voters turning out in areas like Ward 15. That's Jenny Spencer. She's a councilwoman new. That's the Detroit Shoreway area. Ward 3, which includes your area, that's downtown and near West Side, seeing big push of voters. And that would suggest Justin Bibb doing well there. He does live downtown and has really targeted those folks. Ward 17, far West Side, which is where Ross Debello lives, though that's probably not him as much as it is Kevin Kelly, Unions, and some Bibb out there. Seeing a spike in a few precincts in Ward 4, which is where you're going to find Bashir Jones. Maybe there seems to be a decent turnout in Ward 8, that's Collinwood. That could be Dennis Kucinich territory. That's sort of the same folks. That's Councilman Mike Polensek, who's been there as long as Dennis has been around, so I think there's some overlap. What we don't know is Far East Side, Ward 1, traditionally big turnout, has good turnout, but that could be split among Zach Reed, Bashir Jones, and then if you move over towards Shaker Square, hard to tell who that could be. There are some progressives that Bibb targeted. So if you're reading these like tea leaves, which means it's worthless, I'd say what we are seeing is a reflection of that same top 3 or 4 candidates: Dennis, Kevin Kelly, and Justin Bibb.
Okay, that's why we bring Mark in, by the way, because he knows the lay of the land, he knows the geography, he knows where the wards are, he knows who is representing who and what the political leanings of those areas typically are. Now, let's move to talking about what issues have been in play this year. What have the voters been wanting to hear about from the candidates?
Well, given just the terrible news all year of high crime and obviously, the murders, the violent crimes, gun issues, everybody's talking about that. And coupled with that is this idea of police reform. We saw so much coming out of the protests last year. So we have candidates talking almost out of both sides of their mouth. They are trying to give voice to this idea that we have to reform the police to make sure that they're serving all citizens fairly, at the same time saying, you know what, we love the police, we need more police, because people in the neighborhoods, honestly, it's about quality of life for them. They don't get responses from police on a lot of things that anyone else in the suburb would get in a heartbeat, like cars left on the street, vandalism. I mean, Cleveland police cannot respond to those. They are too busy with high priority calls. That has gotten a lot of attention, and an issue of bringing neighborhood police stations back. They used to be called mini stations. They might be in a rec center, they might be, at some other community area that people like to see a police officer on duty. Sometimes they would get out and walk around the park. All candidates, or at least the 6 we spoke to, endorse that idea of bringing some of those back. Where they differ is on the police reform issue. Justin Bibb, probably the outlier, saying that he supports strongly this ballot initiative that will be on in November that would give more control or oversight of the police to a citizens group. Other candidates say, hey, I don't want to give that up as mayor. I need to make sure I can control and be in charge of my police department. So you see a little difference there. Other issues, economic recovery. We're obviously in a pandemic-crippled economy in Cleveland with taxes going down, but at the same time, they're getting $511 million from the COVID Recovery Act money from the federal government. How they spend that is been debated. Some say housing, some say more on business. Some say let's hire more police. So there's been a good, healthy discussion this year on those issues. If you were going to drop down to the next one, it might be downtown development, lakefront. What you're not hearing candidates talk about is education, probably the hardest issue solve or to suggest that you could do something different. Cleveland, a lot of people forget, is in charge. The mayor is in charge of the Cleveland schools. That was done years ago, and in this case, Mayor Jackson has just left it to Eric Gordon, who's proven to be a solid CEO. I think most candidates will not mess with that, but it has been safety and equity and jobs and recovery, and then, everybody wants more investment in neighborhoods and housing.
Mm-hmm. A lot of important issues for sure, a lot of things that will impact Clevelanders in a major way. This is going to be a big change. This is the first time we're voting for a new mayor in 16 years. Frank Jackson has been the mayor for 16 years, unprecedented.
Yeah, this is the first chance to change that. Even though 20 years ago in 2001 was the most competitive primary, Jane Campbell won that, lost 4 years later to Frank Jackson, who has maintained and really been reelected an unprecedented 4 times, largely unchallenged each year. So he's gone. I think a lot of people, including the candidates, are talking about the need for change within city departments.
Mm-hmm. Now, with this primary election today, the top 2 candidates then go on to the general election. They'll be on the ballot in November. This is a nonpartisan primary, so nobody's differentiated necessarily by their party. It's just the top 2 candidates, they go on. So how is this race going to be different tomorrow morning, Mark, than it has been up to this point?
It's a totally different game, and I look forward to it because you only have 2 candidates to cover. Now you can really drill down into both the backgrounds, what they're saying, how accurate is it. I think there's been a lot of good coverage this year. People really try to look at the issues, what they're saying, how their plans. There's been challenges in campaign flyers to people's statements, a lot of negative advertising. We can all dig in a little bit more now. Also, the dynamic changes. Depending what we see, are we going to have a black candidate and a white candidate, 2 white candidates, 2 black candidates? Unfortunately, race always matters in these issues. Will come into play with the east-west side divide in Cleveland. That gives it a whole different dynamic. I think you can really then force the candidates to show how they might be different on these issues. And they will be campaigning pretty much as soon as they give their, I guess, your acceptance speech or your, I won and moving on, then it's time to go because it is a sprint. I mean, it's September 14th. It's less than 2 months.
It is.
What is that? 5, 6 weeks.
About 6 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to come quickly, for sure. Well, this is why we are very happy to have Mark Naymik here on our investigative team. We know that he's going to be asking those tough questions, the questions that you want the answers to. If you are a voter who has not voted yet and you are in the Cleveland area, you're registered in Cleveland, polls are open until 7:30 tonight. If you need last-minute information, again, that Leading the Land series by Mark Naymik and Sarah Schuchman, great resource on WKYC.com. We also have a voter guide if you need to check where your polling location is. You can find that at WKYC.com/elections. We'll have updates on all of our broadcasts. Mark will bring those to us tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I do want to just make one last note, and that is if you're not even in Cleveland, I know people do care about the race because the leader of the land really affects so much. This is the engine that drives prosperity in the region, your lakefront development, bringing big companies and jobs, and all of that comes down to this race and that next leader. So we believe it definitely is what matters most.
And we need to be paying attention to that, whether or not you actually live in the residential area where you're able to cast that vote. And with that, we'll let you go with this special edition of 3 News Now, talking about the Cleveland mayoral special primary today on Tuesday, September 14th. Thanks for being here with Mark Naymik. I'm Stephanie Haney.